When it comes to generative AI, one issue that people have been very upset about from the very beginning is something like copyright. The fact that various artists' work, I'm here talking about visual artists and also authors, that their work was taken and used to train generative AI models. And that's not right. They shouldn't have done that. There's something wrong about that. Sometimes it's characterized as a copyright or an IP violation. So it's a legal issue. Other times, there's certain kinds of harms articulated, like you're using their work to take their jobs. There's different ways of characterizing the sort of ways in which people are upset, but this kind of concern was expressed pretty immediately after generative AI became a thing. Now, I have to say, I'm not completely convinced people ought to be upset as they are, or at least I have certain kinds of questions or concerns about it. So, think about one kind of case in particular. This is just one example, but there's lots of cases in which artists get something from other artists. So, as a friend and DJ told me, Prince was highly influenced by Jimi Hendrix, and you can hear Jimi Hendrix in Prince in the same way, or a similar way anyway, that you might hear Stephen King in some output of an LLM, even though, of course, it's more, if you like, inspired by Stephen King to anthropomorphize it a bit than it is written by Stephen King. So maybe we should think about large language models or generative AI more generally as that sort of thing, loosely inspired by other kinds of artists, but not actually copying it, not violating copyright or IP law, etc. So, I wanted to talk about this with an actual expert on the ethics and the law of copyright and IP. So I talked to Darren, who's written books about this sort of things. Really, really surprisingly, sort of shockingly interesting conversation. I would have thought, oh, copyright, blah, how interesting could that be? Turns out really, really fascinating stuff. I want to just highlight a couple of things here. I'm not going to go into the details. The short of it is that Darren thinks that there's no way this stuff, any of the lawsuits, are going to hold up in court, that our copyright law, at least in the US, is not up to the task or it doesn't cover the kinds of complaints that are being issued. It's not really violations of IP, it's not theft, and that we can think about a kind of moral wrongness in what's going on here, but it's not what you think. So, two things to highlight here in this regard. Number one, I want to distinguish between the potential and probable wrong of stealing books and then training an AI. That's one kind of way you might wrong someone. And then separate from that is using the book to do certain things to which artists did not explicitly or maybe even implicitly consent to. Two different things. I think it's quite plausible that, say, an OpenAI stole those books, and that's not good, but it's also not a moral abomination. I mean, they should have paid 20 bucks per book or something along those lines. So I don't think that's the thing to get worked up about, even though it is indeed a moral and probably a legal wrong. The question is whether using their data, the data that is the books, the pictures, etc., from various artists, using it to create generative AI models, in particular for commercial purposes, is ethically problematic. Once we're focused on that second sort of thing, what makes it morally or ethically problematic, things get a bit murky. And according to Darren, the most plausible way to think about this is not in terms of something like property theft or really not theft of any kind. Instead, the way to think about this is in terms of invasiveness, that using people's material, using people's, in particular, using their style or capturing and recreating their style is invasive to the self. It somehow compromises the integrity of the self. That's kind of a weird view. And shockingly, it comes from a philosopher named Hegel. Hegel is well known among philosophers, less known among non philosophers. He's a phenomenally obscure writer. It's very difficult to penetrate what the hell he's saying. But the general idea is something like this: you are not just your body or your thoughts or your brain or your mind or something like this. You are a social entity. And here's an example of what that might look like. For myself, I'm not just sort of my body and the things that I think. I'm also a father, I'm a husband, I'm a friend, I'm a philosopher, I'm a consultant, I'm an advisor, whatever. Part of what I am is my relations to other people. That's part of me. I'm not, if you like, this isolated thing or this entity that you could abstract away from my social relations. I am, at least in part, my social relations. Similarly, you might think I am my style, I am my book, insofar as my book or this podcast is sort of it's part of me. It's part of what I am is to be this person who makes this kind of work, and I am in this work. Kind of an odd view, not crazy though. And if you think that it's plausible, then for those artists whose work is used, it's part of them that is being used, and there's something morally gross, invasive about that sort of thing. That's a moral case for thinking that there's something problematic here, not a legal case, right? Trying to convince at least a US court that uh, people are in their creations and thereby this is invasive of the self and thereby should be protected by law. That's going to be a really hard, it's going to be a really hard claim to vindicate in at least a US court. So that's what we're exploring here. The first half of the conversation is really focused on is there something that's gone wrong here from a legal perspective currently? And if not, how might we think about the ethics of this thing? So it turns out super, super fascinating conversation. All right. So I think you've got all that you need for that. Two housekeeping things that I always try to highlight. Number one, please review the podcast, share it with friends, 5 stars, say this is the greatest podcast ever. I don't care if you lie. I'm an ethicist. I don't care if you lie in this regard. And the other thing is that if you've got any questions that you want me to address in the podcast, any issues, any people you think would be particularly well suited for this podcast, if you think you're particularly well suited to be on the podcast, please reach out to me. Email me, em@reedblackman.com. Em as in ethical machines at reedblackman.com. All right, let's get on to the conversation. So there's a lot of authors getting very worked up because their books were used to train ChatGPT and probably other large language models as well. And the main objection seems to be something like they're taking my work, they're using it for purposes for which I did not intend, and now they're making money from it. Now, suppose I sort of take this position. This is not, I don't know that I hold this position. It's something that I'm trying on. What are you all worked up about? I mean, your book is one book of, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of books and other
Millions.
kinds of text, right? Millions, right? So it's such a tiny percent. Your book is not being reproduced. The large language models, they don't have access to their training data. They can't copy paste from their training data. They're not writing books that realistically compete, as far as I know, with any of those authors. So I don't know. It just sort of seems to me like, yes, they used your book for purposes to which you didn't consent. Then again, people use my books for all sorts of things that I didn't consent to, like using it as a doorstop. Whatever, I don't care. And it's such a small contribution. So I guess my question is why, well, should authors be worked up about this? Is it some kind of ethical, if not legal theft?
So, I mean, first, you're right. There's millions of authors whose stuff is being used, from the very famous to the really mundane, right? All these language models do is just scour the internet for content, and they just grab it all indiscriminately and just take it
Sure.
all in. And it's not just the language models, right? It's the visual equivalents too. So, Midjourney, things like that, doing the same thing and getting the same lawsuits that are coming
Yeah.
about. So, I mean, on a really pedestrian concern, it's that, I mean, they're being shoved out of work. So all these writers, particularly the mundane kind, and the artists who are commercial artists creating, covers for fantasy books and things like that,
Mhm.
are concerned that their stuff is being used to train a thing that is going to compete with them directly and is going to win, right? It's going to shove them out of
Mhm.
the industry by doing what they do faster, cheaper, and frankly better in most cases. So, yeah, I mean there's a bit of butthurt going on there when you come right down to it. When they try and make like a more compelling argument, it's that
Yeah,
these
before you do that, let me
yeah,
say one thing about why I'm not sure I find that argument compelling in the first place, or maybe and you can tell me why you don't. But yeah, look, there's bad outcomes for you. It doesn't follow from that that anything unjust has been done. It doesn't
Sure.
follow from that that your rights have been violated or anything like that. So, yeah, look, they might make some things that put you out of a job. Of course, that could always be the case in a variety of circumstances. You lose your job because technology has advanced, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Well, so there's a tighter connection there that I think it's gonna make it more personal. I agree
yeah.
with you. I don't think this actually directly justifies any complaints of moral undoing or something, but the fact that their stuff is being used to put them out of work. Now, of course, I mean, nobody promised them a job, or if they did, they shouldn't have. But the worry is that I mean, it's a really realistic worry. If you are a commercial
Yeah.
artist, you are about to be out of business. This is going to kill you.
Mm.
It's real. It's legit. So are they being harmed? Yeah. So if we want to go with a harm metric, there's something to that. I think the concern tends to run deeper. I think the concern is that their stuff is being used to create something of value. So somebody's making a profit on this. So it's not the AI per se, it's that the AI is a tool that's being used to generate something of value and they're not getting a kickback on, right? That's sort of a secondary concern.
So, okay, so let me give you an argument that's probably a bad argument, but I'll float it. I don't know. I make screws. I'm a screw factory. That doesn't sound great. Uh, I'm a factory that makes screws or some other kinds of things, and someone uses those to make some other thing of value that I hadn't planned on, and then they go sell that thing. They make I don't know. I don't know what they make. Wooden horses. I don't know. That's a weird example. I have toys on the brain for some reason.
The
They
high
make
value
something. That's the
17th century
point.
toys.
Yes, they're coveted. You don't understand the market for it, I guess. Yeah. So all the time, people are using other people's things
Sure.
to make other things that they then sell. So why is this any different?
Because you bought the screws.
That can't be it, though. I mean, okay, so look, some people might say something like, the reason that what you're doing is wrong is that you didn't pay for my book. So there seems to be like there's a one issue with that the books were stolen, right? They went onto the equivalent of a Napster and they downloaded a bunch of books illegally. But suppose let's say an OpenAI had paid for all the books. And then they'd still done it. I take it that the author still would have been like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 you bought my book, but I didn't say that you could use it for that." So it seems to me like that they've got to say that there are at least two wrongs. The first wrong is you stole my book, which frankly is a fairly petty theft, right? You stole my book, big deal. And the second wrong is you used it to train an LLM, which now is going to put me or others like me out of business. And it seems to me like the first wrong definitely happened, and it's also hard for me to get worked up about, like, company steals books. Not good, but okay, here's some compensation. Here's the $20 your books would have been. I don't think they'd be happy. So it's gotta be the second wrong has to exist, I think, independently of the first one happening. Because we
And in
could just do this
fact,
hypothetical where they did pay.
let's deflate both of them
Okay.
because really I can do my best to promote these arguments, but I really don't think either one flies. I think
Mhm.
they're a smokescreen. So the first concern is that there is copying happening in the training of the language models. And that's true. This is exactly how it works. It scours the internet and it makes what are called incidental copies of it, right? Every time you go to a website, you make a copy of that website. It's just
Mm,
contained in temporary memory on your computer and then it goes away. So
mm,
every time the models go and scour the internet, they're making copies of it. They're not retaining those copies, but they do
sure.
make a copy, which, I mean, on the letter of it would seem to be a prima facie violation of copyright law, right? I have, as an author, the exclusive right to make copies of my stuff. The problem is that this is just how the internet works, right? This is how the technology works. And there
Mhm.
have been case after case saying, look, this isn't a thing. This is fair use. So Google's been involved in any number of these as it's developed search capabilities and indexing and image searches, right? It makes little copies of things. And case after case have said it's permissible, it's fair. So
Okay, so
that
I take it that the grounds on which it's permissible is that it's fair use, and it's fair use because what they're doing with it doesn't constitute they're not creating competition in the marketplace. Is that the
Well, I mean,
idea?
fair use is a messy, complicated doctrine. Part of it is that it's not creating a market substitute. Part of it is the purpose for which it's created. There's at least 4 factors statutorily that go into that. But really, it comes out and says, look, it's for the public good. Ultimately, is
Mhm.
what I think that comes down to. And that's the point of fair use in the first place. There are certain things that would be, let me back it up. Uh, so there are a bunch of different ethical models for what justifies copyright, but the party line in America is that copyright is there for the public. The reason we dangle the carrot of copyright is to incentivize people to make stuff. And when they make
Sure.
stuff, we all get the benefit out of this. But
Mhm.
there are going to be occasions when giving somebody that sort of exclusive monopoly and control over their stuff is ultimately bad for society. And so fair use is one of those little widgets in the law that allows us to say, well, I mean, it would be a prima facie infringement of copyright, but we want to allow it for X, Y, and Z reasons. And the flexibility of fair use allows them to sort of move it into whatever predetermined answer they want.
'Kay.
So this comes out and says, look, this kind of technology is good for us. We want to allow for this. And based on that kind of precedent, insofar as there's precedent, which is a squishy thing in copyright, the fact that the language models are training on this and making incidental copies, it's not going to land. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. But it
'Kay.
was, an attempt. I think the concern, one step beyond that is that they are getting outcompeted, and that's a legit concern. So,
Mhm.
if you can file a class action suit and a bunch of you can get in on this together, you can actually afford to, sue OpenAI and maybe get them to do something. But it's a shot in the dark. I think, look, behind this is existential terror, right? I think it comes down to here's this thing that I've spent my entire life believing made me special, right? I've been training my entire life to do this, making art, writing. And now
Sure.
here comes a thing that just stomps me out. It takes this thing that was, special
Yeah.
and it just
Sure.
shows me I'm not special. I think it's horror.
That's
And it's
okay,
like
so
it's
2
not a
things.
moral argument. It's just they're it's a
Right.
death throw. They're flailing.
Right, so, I mean, one is exactly the point you made, which is that that's not an argument, I'm suffering from existential threat, thus, it shouldn't be permitted. That's not gonna fly. The other thing that is arguably it seems to me that's not justified. I mean, I rock climb. It's really hard to do. It takes a lot of effort, but you can build a robot or some kind of machine that climbs rocks better than me. I don't then think, "Oh my god, the joy that I took in rock climbing is gone because there are other things that climb rocks better than me." Or if I see a mountain goat or whatever, there are amazing climbers, they balance on nothing. I don't think, there's no point in me climbing anymore." Uh, right there. So why should I think it any more than if I do philosophy and there's a better philosopher than me, I think, forget it. There's no point in me doing this anymore because there's others better than me. So why would the existential threat even be justified?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? One is again a fairly pedestrian version of this, which is you're not in competition with a rock climbing robot, right? It's not going to
Sure.
knock you out of the game. So when we're talking
Yeah.
about professional artists, they are in competition with these things, and they are going to be knocked out of the game. So I mean, it's a real world but fairly pedestrian concern so far as it goes.
Though from the existential argument, right? The existential argument is like, I've got a decreasing sense of self-worth.
Yeah, and
Whereas
look,
the other thing is I'm going to be out of a job and then I can't provide for my family, which is
so
a
there
legit concern.
So
Yeah.
aside from the ethical concern, there were huge artistic concerns over the past year about that's not art,
Mm,
right? Regardless of putting me out of work, it's
yeah.
not art for whatever reason. And we went through all this 200 years ago with the invention of photography, right? Along comes this technology that can do everything that the portrait painters can do faster, better, and cheaper. And they all screamed and complained, right? This is not art. It's just technology. Anyone can do it. But it was the death throes. It was the same death throes. And they had to find a way to justify their own existence again. And they did. They created modern art. That's where modern art
Mhm.
comes from because they were being outcompeted by photography. And it's going to happen again, right? The artists are going to have to figure out how to compete with it. But I mean, you brought up a really good point, which is why should they give a damn, right? They can still make art, they can still write, they can still make art. They just can't make a living at it. So, or at least that's the risk. So, if the reason you were making this was to produce a product, if you're a product oriented artist, you are in trouble. But if you are a
Mhm.
process oriented artist and you were doing this because you like expression, you like getting this thing out of you, you like creating whatever that is, then
Right.
this is no threat at all. You can keep doing what you're
Sure.
already doing. But I think so we've got the we've got the basic complaints about copying. And I AI is just doing what artists have always done, right? It looks at a bunch of art, it tries to replicate that art, it learns, right? It's no
Sure.
different from how, I learned to draw or how you learned to write. You've read a bunch of stuff, and out of that sort of soup of observation, you learn how to do a thing. It's what artists have
Yep.
always done. And
Yep.
nobody goes around suing other artists for looking at their art so that they can be in competition. It's the fact that it's a computer, right? It's the fact that it's AI. That's what
Mhm.
bothers them, right? That's the existential thing. That there was this human thing, at least when I was having humans compete with me, it was humans, but now it's being sort of drained of the humanity. At least I think that's the worry.
Mm.
Again, I don't think there is an ethical argument to that. I think there's one ethical argument behind all of this, and I don't think that's it.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so what is that ethical argument behind these companies are unjustified in using my material for those things, even if they've purchased my book?
It's the worry that when AI creates something, whether we're talking about ChatGPT or we're talking about Midjourney, whether it's textual, visual, whatever, it all goes into this soup. It makes, data connections between all the stuff that it's studied, and then it makes that. And in most cases, I mean, it's not copying anything any more than an
Mhm.
artist who relies on their own memory is copying anything. There's weird little exceptions, like you showed enough pictures of Mickey Mouse, it now knows what Mickey Mouse looks like, and it can draw Mickey
Mhm.
Mouse. That's a potential copyright infringement. Fictional characters are weird for that reason. But aside from that, I mean, it's not actually copying anything with one weird exception, it can copy style.
Mhm.
So I've dealt with both visual and textual AI enough now. It's developing a default style. Like ChatGPT just sort of screams its own nature. At this point, it is a very bland but recognizable style in
Mm.
the default. And Midjourney has a sort of couple of default styles, and they're recognizable. So I'll see a thing on the internet. I'm like, well, that's Midjourney. I know it when I see it. So that's
Mm,
true.
yeah.
Just left to its own devices, it will just produce a thing that is sort of recognizable. But I can also tell it to write in the style of the Beastie Boys, or write in the style of Shakespeare, or paint in the style of Monet, or paint in the style of Mondrian or something, and it can do that. And that's
So
when things
yeah.
start to get a little problematic.
Yeah, so explain to me why that's problematic. I mean, I one thing that I had to rely on my DJ friend to give me the example, but it was something like Prince is really influenced by Jimi Hendrix, and you might say something like, "Oh, you can hear Jimmy in Prince's music." But you wouldn't say something like, "And so Prince owes Jimmy money." Maybe some gratitude or something along those lines, but you wouldn't no one thinks to accuse Prince of theft, I don't think, tell me if I'm wrong, but, "Oh, Prince stole that from Jimi Hendrix, and so his song is, morally bankrupt," or something like that, or it's fruit from the rotten tree? Spoiled fruit of the what the hell's the metaphor?
I need to back away from the metaphor.
Okay, fine,
So s
yeah, maybe I'll back away from the metaphor. Um,
so
but
I
okay, go ahead. Yeah.
all right, well, so normally when I'm teaching about copyright or talking about copyright, I put it in terms of property, right? I think property is our traditional model. Whenever we're looking for a way to justify copyright, we go to old property models to do it. So the 2
Okay.
biggies are Locke and Hegel,
Mhm.
oddly enough. So Locke has the acquisition theory that you deserve to own a thing because you labored over this thing that nobody
Yeah.
owned and you put value into it, and so you get to own.
With the land.
Exactly, with the
Yeah.
unowned common. So, you get to own the thing, and so this is a reasonable model that my students understand, and then you get to
Sure,
say,
yeah.
"Look, taking somebody's intellectual property, which was produced with intellectual labor, is like stealing somebody's car or trespassing on their land, right? I just have to put it in that sort of model, and that's reasonable. This is, we think of it as theft, but intellectual property is weird. It doesn't work that way, right? You don't
Mm,
take it. It is not that sort of competitive good. You're making a copy
right.
of the thing, and that was the problem. And so when we talk about copying style, we're not talking about usually just stealing a style. It's too ephemeral for that. But there's something beneath this, and I think it is closer to the Hegelian model. So Hegel's idea is that you come to own things because you put yourself into it, right? You have appropriated part of the world as part of your personality. That property is the will's attempt to actualize itself. Put yourself into the world and you absorb that stuff. It is literally you. It's an external part of you, but it's literally you. All right. This is the Hegelian thing, which is weird to,
Can you
American ears.
just give me a normal it's not weird to non-American ears? Can you give me an example of what that would be like? I mean, I get that people get attached to shit that they make.
Sure.
I built this with my own 2 hands, but I wouldn't then go on to say, "Yo, it's oh yeah, that house is that's a bit of you now." I would
Okay.
just say, "You really care about this thing." Am I missing something that Hegel's trying to push?
Yes, you are. So
Yeah.
the ordinary way of thinking about it is think about, well, your style of dress, right? I mean, from what I can see, it's kind of innocuous. But when you start to develop your style, you have, infinite.
You mean stunning? You mean the word
That's
you're
what I
looking for is
meant. Sorry.
stunning. Yeah,
It's
yeah, 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 yeah.
Canadian. There are a million styles to choose from, a million ways you could go with that. And you start building wardrobes, right? It's not a way I normally think about this, but you start building wardrobes in the sense that, well, this is me, right? This is my style.
Mhm.
This
Sure, yeah,
is
yeah.
how I'm going to work. And
Literally yesterday, I tried on 2 pairs of shoes, and one of them, my wife said, "Well, this one is more you, and that one is Eric, my good friend Eric." I was like, "Yeah, that's exactly right. This one's
correct.
Eric, and this is me." Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So, yes.
Okay, so we start to get a sense of this, right? We collect things from the world, and then, right, certain things are us and certain things aren't us. And at a certain point, right, you give up on that style. Like the whole punk thing I was rocking in the 90s, you know what? It had its day and it's time to get rid of that stuff. That
Sure.
on Hegel's view is when you don't own it anymore, right? When it no
Mm.
longer, it literally embodies your personality, you no longer have a rights claim to.
Man, so, I'm gonna say something wrong again, and I just want you to tell me why it's wrong again. So, I guess I could see certain things as being a kind of symbol? They're sort of symbols of you? They represent you in some sense, or they make reference to you? Is that the idea? I put my heart and soul to it means something like or this expresses the things that I care about. Do I have to say anything more over and above that stuff in order to be Hegelian about all this?
Well, Hegel thinks that you are literally in that. This is not metaphorical. This is part of you, right? Which is again
I mean, it has
not
to
the
be a
American
bit
way we think of
metaphorical.
the individual. It's for him. It's not right. What you are does
I mean,
not
it's not a sex
end.
doll.
Well, what you are on his view does is not limited by the extent of your physical self, right? It's
Eh,
arbitrary limitation.
sure. I guess I could see this if you said something like, "Listen, who I am is partly constituted by my relationships with other people. I
Yeah,
am a son, a husband, a brother, a friend, a blah 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 blah,"
good.
which means that who I am is not just a matter of something like features of me if you looked at me under a microscope, so to speak, but who I am is fundamentally a social entity.
It's
I can see
partly
that with
social, partly
people.
intrinsic, partly extrinsic.
I was trying to yeah, yeah. But and then I guess you're pointing something like, well, just take that same structural point and apply it to physical objects.
Sure.
And you'd get the same like part of who you are is yes, you're a brother and a husband and a father and a friend and a leather jacket wearer or whatever the hell.
Weird. Well, I mean, think about how closely music associates with style, right? Especially when you're
Mhm.
younger. Are you a metalhead? Are you a punk? Are you a goth? Are you
Mhm.
preppy? It embodies itself in what you are, which then connects you with other people. But this is the basic idea of the Hegelian model. Now, I was saying that in the US, there's very much this instrumentalist approach to copyright. So it's there because it serves the public. The continental European model is very different. It's very much based on this Hegelian idea of personality rights.
See,
Yeah.
does it actually,
Oh,
like, historically speaking, come from Hegel? Or does it just happen to be also Hegel's view?
oh no, it's Hegel via Kant. Hegel has written more actually about it in Philosophy of Right. Kant had a little bit to say, but oh yeah,
Mhm.
this is the philosophical underpinning to it in continental Europe. Historically,
Interest
British copyright's older. It goes back to 1709,
mm,
and that's very much a practical concern. But the continental Europeans, the Germans and the French in particular, got a hold of this and said, here's a good idea. You own
hmm,
it, whatever it is, the thing that you've made, because there's a stamp of your personality on it, right? That's
uh-huh.
the model. So, not literal Hegel, but it's definitely following the coloring
Sure,
in the
sure.
lines.
Causal chain leading from Hegel to EU copyright law.
Absolutely. And so
Interesting.
you get to own the thing that you wrote or you drew or you painted or you photographed because I can see you in it.
Mhm.
Right? It's got your style in that sense. So the EU copyright isn't about style in particular, but I think it's the easiest way to look at it. This is, this is a Van Gogh. This is a Picasso. This is a Shakespeare. I can see it, right? I'm familiar with his stuff. That's his stuff.
I think it's also something like if this is sort of plausible, it would be an explanation for why an authentic Picasso is more valuable than a Picasso another painting that is indistinguishable visually from the real Picasso, but it's not Picasso.
Sure.
And that's because Picasso's in that one, he's not in that one.
Yeah, yeah, so we can talk about it in one of the terms is aura, right? It has something special just in that object. I don't know how I buy into aura, but I get the idea of
Yeah.
style. So I'm good with style on this.
Yeah. So if I think I know the answer to this question, but I just want to make sure. So in the past I would have said something like, look, if it's going to be some kind of theft, it's got to be some kind. If there's something wrong here, it must be some kind of theft. Maybe there's some kind of legal theft going on, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert on copyright or IP. I don't know. What's more, it doesn't settle the ethical question, which is ethically speaking, what ought the law to be? What ought the IP or copyright law to be, especially if it's underdetermined in this particular case. And then, so that's one question. And then, relatedly, is there some kind of moral theft that's going on? Like OpenAI engaged in some kind of ethical or moral theft of authors' data? But I think that what you're saying, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, is that the Hegelian conception is rejects both of those. Or rather, not doesn't reject it, but it's not talking about moral ownership. It's a different kind of thing that connects people to their creations that is not well captured by using the term ownership.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Hegel talks about this in terms of property, and we can talk about it in terms of theft. But ultimately, I think you're right. It distracts from that way of thinking. Okay, so take the idea that there is literally some of you in your style, in the thing that you've created. If
Sure.
you're an artist, if you're a serious artist, you've spent your career figuring out what this thing is, right? When you started, you didn't have a style. All you did was
Right.
copy other people. You replicate other
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
You try on different jackets until you figure out which pair of shoes is you. And you're like, all right,
Sure.
this is it. This is the pair of
Yeah.
shoes. Got that covered. Good. All right. And you work on your pair of shoes. And I mean, this is you. And everyone's like, yeah, those are
Yeah.
your shoes. And then somebody comes along and says, "Yeah, those shoes are great," and make a perfect copy of it.
Mhm.
I mean, it's theft is maybe the easiest legal analog we have to that, but it's not quite right.
Yeah.
It's more personal than that, right? If I take your stuff, I've taken your stuff. But if I take your style, the Hegelian thinking is I've taken you, right? I've taken something about you. And
Mm.
that's personal. It's something that you have spent a career building if you're an
Yeah,
artist.
I could see that. I mean, I've done a decent amount of writing. I think I have a style of writing that I think a lot about. The way that I write is extremely intentional. And yeah, if someone wrote a book, especially on the topics that I write on, in my style, yeah, I'd be pissed. Justifiably
Yeah.
so.
Well, I think pissed is gonna come second, right? What's first is horror, right? When you
Mm,
see
with me, anger is always the first
ah,
reaction. But go on.
well, look, If you think about this as a literal embodiment of you, right? This is your personality embodied in
Yeah.
this thing. Then seeing your personality embodied in a thing that you did not make, right? This is
Mhm.
the definition of abject, right? It's something that should not be outside you, that is outside you. It is
Hmm.
like seeing blood spilled on the ground, right?
Hmm.
That doesn't belong there.
And okay, I'm m on board enough.
Okay.
That this it's like it's not crazy,
So let me
but then I
keep running
think,
with this model. Hold on.
"Okay, great, good."
So instead of thinking of it as ordinary property theft, right? Think of it as closer to stealing biological tissue, right? There's a whole legal background to that too,
Yeah.
where normally we think, well, in the law, once you've disposed of your biological tissue, you don't own it anymore, right? So when you go to the doctor and they draw blood or take a biopsy or a skin sample or something like that, you have given up ownership of that thing. It's not
Mhm.
yours anymore. And you know what? That just feels really weird. It feels really wrong. And there have been a number of cases that have attempted to deal
Hmm.
with this. But when somebody takes my cells and then does something with it, that's theft is not quite the right word. This is invasive, right?
Really?
That's what
Yeah,
that feels like.
is this related to the Henrietta Lacks case?
Sure, it fits right in there.
So, right, Henrietta Lacks, I don't know all the I mean, there's lots of details I don't know, but something like doctors took certain cells from Henrietta Lacks. She didn't I don't know if she didn't consent or she didn't know that they were being taken, or they
Didn't
used it
certainly didn't
they used it
consent
for
in any real sense and probably didn't.
right. I mean, so I guess I don't think I have this kind of connection to my biological cells in the way that
You're
others
not Henrietta
do.
Lacks.
I'm trying to think, like, if someone stole or if someone took they took a piece of my hair or whatever, and then from that they fashioned a new cure for cancer and, I don't know, cured millions and made billions. But I think, "You owe me. You used my hair." I
Okay, so
don't
you're bringing it back to money. I don't think essentially this is a money issue, but
mm,
American law works on money, right? You have to show harm in order to be
mm.
able to get money back in this
It's
sort
because
of
it's a
civil case.
okay.
And so, look, I mean, we can, if we're Henrietta Lacks's family, then we can talk about this in terms of harm that you owe us something, something like that. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's not crazy. I think that that's reasonable, but I think in other cases where people have had their biological tissues taken, I don't think it's a money issue. I think
Mhm.
it's an invasion
Not
issue,
fundamental.
and I think that that's the same sort of thing going on when it comes to style. This is invasive, right? It's not a
Mhm.
property thing. It can be a rights thing, but it's a right to the integrity of the self, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to put that in legal terms in America, right? There are ways you can
I
deal with style theft
yeah.
in American law, but copyright really doesn't fly that well.
So going back to Prince and Jimmy,
Yeah.
you hear Jimmy and Prince in some
Mhm.
songs or something like, and there's loads of examples, of course, right? There's tons and tons of examples where you hear X and Y. Would those count as invasive on this analysis?
I think it's hard, right? I think it's gonna be hard to draw boundaries here. Here's gonna be my guess. Prince is like a descendant of Jimi Hendrix,
Okay.
right? And I mean, that's let's call it a natural, unproblematic way for your blood to get into somebody else, right? To move along, right? You
Okay.
have children,
Okay.
your blood passes along, and this is normal and everyone expects this.
Sure.
But having it drawn out of you and making Prince, now we got a problem, right? Jimmy's not going to have a problem
Sure.
that there are people who are influenced and even, sort of absorb some of this. Jimmy's coming from a blues and jazz background where this is normal.
Right.
This is what is done. But
Yes.
somehow just coming out and replicating, that's a problem.
Okay. So let me just figure out where we are now. So you might think that authors, writers of text that were used to, their text was used to train a large language model or stable diffusion of, an image generation model. It's not clear that there's copying of a legally or ethically problematic nature. It's not clear that there's sort of a piece of property. There is a piece of property that was stolen, in fact, historically how it went on, but that's sort of incidental. I mean, I'm inclined to think it's incidental. And so are we at a place where the only sort of legal grounds are gonna be the kinds of grounds that we would find in Hegel/Kant influenced Europe, where we have to think that the wrong is a wrong. I don't even know if this is a phrase, but something like a wrong of invasiveness?
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Frankly, I think that most of the lawsuits that we're seeing now are death throes, right? It is people who are seriously in trouble professionally, right? They look at this as the end and they are doing anything in their power to not, right, go into that. So we saw the sort of negotiations that the Writers Guild was going through with Hollywood, right? That's this. That is fear that they are being put out of work. But there's not much of a legal claim there, very little, and
Yeah.
it's probably all going to get swept away. There's not too much of a moral claim. It's just this is the animal caught in a trap, right? And it's doing what it can. And it's pitiful. And I don't mean pitiful in the that's too bad. It's pitiful like, yeah, I get it. Wow, right? That sucks.
Or pity.
Yeah. But I don't think that there's going to be much in the way of legal or moral argument to that. Yeah, the
Yeah.
one hole I see is the style issue, and I think it's deep, and I think it's personal, and I think it's what's behind a lot of this anxiety, but yeah, certainly the law has problems dealing with it because American law, especially in, civil cases like this, depends on harms, and this isn't easily translated into harms. We can talk about
Yeah.
psychological harm, right? There might be something to that, but even that's, it's hard to measure.
But the psychological harm is downwind of the wrong,
I
right?
think so.
You suffer the psychological harm because you've been violated in that way.
I
It's
think
not the
that's right.
being upset that is the harm, it's the violation. That's
Exactly
the
right. And so I don't think we have much of a legal model to work with here. And I mean, people will try and find a way, and they have. And there have been lots of lawsuits over sound alikes where, it sounds like it's Tom Waits, but it's not Tom Waits, right? There's lots of cases like that. But we don't even have, given the sort of models of ethics that we have from, deontology, utilitarianism, we don't have this there, right? It's not a clean fit. It doesn't fit in nicely. And so we end up with, something like a moral instinct on this that
Mhm.
doesn't land anywhere familiar. And that's hard.
Y I I can see that's hard. I mean, yeah, because I see the appeal of the argument. There's something about it that I get that seems plausible, or at least at a minimum not crazy. It seems more crazy to think that it's gonna find its way into the American legal system. I don't think that's gonna happen.
I think
So, I mean, can you imagine the conversation in court? "Well, Hegel says," and then forget it, we're done here. Who the hell's Hegel? Trump might say, like, "Hegel's been doing some great work." Anyway.
it's the best.
So, let me give you a different sort of argument. There's the rights of individuals and there's the rights of a community,
Mhm.
something along these lines. So, it can be the case that I sort of said, "Okay, look, let's fast forward. Right now, we don't have really good books coming out of a large language model. We don't have amazing art, maybe I'm wrong about this, coming out of a large language model that's really competing with fine artists. So I guess it's already could be competing with commercial artists, so maybe the point doesn't hold. But let's say a book, right? Let's say the thing that writes a book that contends with Stephen King's books or something like that. You tell it to write a horror story, blah blah blah. Um, put the style issue to the side. Stephen King has a certain style. Let's put that to the side for a moment, and we say, listen, Stephen King, he has got a lot of books, but even his books are a very tiny drop in the ocean of training data. And so when those books come out and they compete with Stephen King's books, it's not because of Stephen King's books in the training data. It's because of there's so much stuff in the training data. And so Stephen King hasn't been wronged. But then perhaps I say something like, but the community of writers has been wronged. So the set, the set of writers has been wronged, even though it's not the case that any individual writer has been wronged. Or maybe you would say that the individual writer is wronged by virtue of being a member of a community that was wronged. What do you think about something like that?
I like that you're trying to come up with an argument here.
I'm
I don't think
trying.
well, I don't think there's anything to it. I think that we would need to locate what the wrong is, right? So it's not obviously going to be a copyright thing. Or if it is, I mean, it's very, very shallow in terms of are they being harmed from their stuff being used? This is the history of art, right? Stuff has always been used. The only
Right.
potential difference is that it's AI that's doing it,
Yeah.
that's shoving them out of the marketplace. I don't know what's going to happen with AI. I think somebody said this once, probably just a meme on Facebook, but if somebody couldn't be bothered writing it, why should I be bothered reading it? And I think that's probably the way we're going to end up. Why would I spend my
Mm.
time absorbing a novel that nobody wrote? Right? That's really weird. It works okay for commercial visual art because, usually that's not there for somebody to spend their time dwelling on. We're going to treat it differently. So I don't think there's a complaint
I don't
about
know. I mean, think about though the completely, fake pop stars. Right? Doesn't Japan, or I think maybe it's Japan, has a famous pop star that's completely fabricated?
I am so unplugged from J-pop, I really couldn't tell you. But, I mean, there are certainly people playing with AI out there for art, and it's charting. So, something's going on there. Maybe I just have too much hope for humanity, and I think we'll actually care about connecting with other humans.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You have too much hope.
Ugh.
So, I mean, I just think, yes, we got into the philosophy business for a reason. We want to get to the bottom of things.
It's
We
the
want to
money.
sort of
Oh,
uncover. It's the money. That's why anyone gets a PhD in philosophy.
that's
Cash.
that's that's the gold.
But most people just want to feel something, and if they don't really care about how they get that feeling.
Yeah, you could be right. I'm hoping for better on that one, but, it does require me locking myself in my office to do that. Here's what I think. I work with a lot of artists and a lot of students who wanna be artists, and they all have really high hopes, right? They have dreams, and they're young. It's the one time they can have it, but those dreams are gonna get crushed. S there's there's too many talented artists out there, right, in every possible medium. There's not enough market for all of that. And in any event, the publishers weren't interested in putting good art out there. They were interested in putting stuff out there that will make a predictable profit.
Right.
Artists are not promised a job. And none of them
Yeah.
think it's that they've been, well, okay, I shouldn't say that. I take it back. Some of them think that they have been wronged by not, getting their break, becoming the big thing. But objectively, their chances were so
Of course.
catastrophically low
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
AI makes no difference to them, right? You're getting edged
Right.
out by humans, you're getting edged out by untalented humans, you're getting
Yeah.
edged out by a machine, right? If you're not getting harmed in those 2 earlier cases, you're not getting harmed in the 3rd case. It's just not a harm thing. Maybe we think that there is, like, some cultural or social or human value to having art, right? Maybe that's true.
Sure.
But AI doesn't hurt that, right? Again, we can keep producing the stuff at exactly the pace we do. We just have to sort of distance ourselves from the commercial aspect of it. And you know what? We should. That's absolutely. I think, if anything, this is a good thing for art. I think it's going to force people who actually gave a damn about art to realize that this was a hands-on thing, this was a human thing, and maybe actually start doing it, right? And not because they have this hope of making money. I don't know, man. We're working a cubicle like the rest of us, but, you could actually engage with this stuff yourself and not because you thought you could make a living at it, but because, you love it, you enjoy something, and maybe, right, this isn't a harm model. This is great. Maybe this is a new renaissance. This is what happens when photography happens, right? We have to find a new
Hmm.
reason for art. And maybe this is it. Maybe this is exactly the kick in the pants we needed. Because you know what? 17th, 18th century portraits were tired. They were not going anywhere. These were not great things. And I was reading a study in I think it was the New York Times recently, about the sheer lack of creative output of the 21st century, which is
Hmm.
surprising. But I mean, what great stuff are we producing that we couldn't stand to go and maybe rethink this thing? So, yeah, I mean, maybe there is reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a question whether there's a reason; it's whether there's sufficient reason. But yes, yeah. So let me get this straight then, just to be clear. Uh, it seems that you think that there's neither a legal nor ethically sound position in defense of the idea that OpenAI, for instance, did anything wrong other than the literal theft of the book itself.
No, I think there is a moral issue with the taking of stuff. I do think that's true. I just don't think we have
Yes,
a
but
nice
it's not.
background to set that up.
Right, right, right. Sorry. So the only defensible position on your view is a moral one, and arguably in Europe also a legal one, which
Maybe.
is the which is the you're in these style. Style is a case in which the people who created the style are in that style, and so taking that style against their will for some other purposes is a violation of their selfhood or something along those lines.
Something like that. It's gonna have a problem in copyright only because copyright has been built into this scaffolding that is now pretty solid, thanks to international treaties and things, that you have to have a work that's infringed. You have to point at that thing that has been copied, and style is slipperier than that. Style is either bigger or
Interesting, yeah.
smaller than a work, and so I do think there's a moral claim here, at least a basis to one. I don't think we could even easily translate that into, like, European copyright because it's still working on this idea of, the original work of authorship, and a style is not that kind of thing. You don't find that in a work. So there's I could concoct something that kinda works, and I could call it a style, but, I mean, it's gonna get thrown out of court. It's not gonna fly. But, I mean,
Right.
I don't think we were worried really about the legal issue. It's a mechanism that's supposed to reflect morality. I think there's a better moral claim, but I don't think we have the sort of moral scaffolding to easily deal with that either. I think we get this moral horror, at least the artist will, and I think it indicates something. Exactly how to build that into something. It's not a harm model. It might be a rights model, but you're right. It's an integrity thing, right? It's a
Mhm.
violation of integrity. The law will want to make that a privacy thing, which is just fucking weird. But I think it's an integrity issue.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like it's super interesting, but yeah, the probability that the law is actually going to embody or characterize or articulate or express something along those lines is it's got to be slim to none.
If you're waiting around for the law to reflect all moral trespassing, then, keep waiting. It's not gonna happen that way.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's not wrong.
All right, Darren. Thanks for giving a lot of subtle analysis that I've not heard anywhere else. I certainly haven't heard anyone say Hegel in this context before, but it's been super helpful and interesting. So thanks again.
Thanks, Reed. Been the best thing I've done all week.
I don't know what else you've done. It could be a low bar.
It's Monday.